Welcome to Insaka, program designed to provide biblical answers for life's questions. I am your host, Philip Hunt.
And I'm your co-host, Sandala Mwanje. Today on Insaka, we have a special guest, Jamie Smith. Jamie is the director of the missions department and also the theological studies by extension here at Central Africa Baptist University. Jamie, we're glad to have you.
Yes, welcome to the program.
Thanks, it's good to be with you.
We have a very interesting topic. It's actually a series, parts of 3, and we want to discuss missions and God's will. Missions and God's will. And that's part of the reason we brought Jamie to help us discuss this topic. But before we get into what we want to do today, Jamie, please do introduce yourself, something about yourself and also your family.
All right. Well, we've been missionaries here for about 8 years now, but prior to that, I grew up on a farm in the state of Ohio back in the United States, and met my wife while we were both going to the same church there in our secondary school years. And so my wife's name is Mandy, and we didn't date, we were just friends during the secondary school years. It wasn't until we were in our university years that we started dating, and God drew us together through a common passion for missions and being used by the Lord in that way. And since then, God has allowed us to have a growing family. We've got 4 children. Our oldest is Lorelei, and then the second born is Georgia. Then our third is Warwick. And lastly, God allowed us to bring in another son while we've been here in Zambia, and he is Zambian by birth. His name is Chola.
Thank you so much. Talking about missions, you've alluded to the fact that you sense the call to missions. Mm-hmm. Just how did that happen? How did you know that God is leading you to missions?
Well, I would say it started, first of all, by just being faithful to the calling that all Christians have, to be faithful witnesses. And it always starts at home. Missions always starts at home in your local church. And so I was serving the Lord there, particularly in the Great Commission. My father would go out every Tuesday night. They had a visitation program. And I would ask my mother, where was he going? She told me, and I said, well, I would love to go and do that. So I started by going with my father, and then over time with other men from the church. And I learned from them what they modeled about how to go out, just truly care about people and find out what their spiritual beliefs were, if they had a relationship with the Lord. And as a result, it just became a part of my everyday life. And it started at the church, but continued throughout my own everyday life in school. And so I think recognizing God's leading, God's calling of your life into a particular vocation, such as missions, comes by just living out the basic principles of the Christian life and being obedient to the Great Commission.
So how then how did God then move you from there to leave the United States, to live in Zambia, and then ultimately, how did you find yourself here at Central Africa Baptist University?
Okay, so, well, it started with the fact that our church was very missions-minded, and we would have missionaries from all over the world come in to share their ministries. Some of them were seeking support. Some of them were just giving updates in order to help spread the passion for sharing the gospel around the world, and seeing that wonderful scene of Revelation chapter 5 and Revelation chapter 7 become a reality, where there would be people from all over, every tribe, nation, tongue, who would be redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, now gathered around the throne room of God. And so being exposed to that on a regular basis, and being using those ideas in my own life. It was just, if God is already using me here, thinking of it like an Acts 1:8 type pattern.
Yeah.
I said, well, God has allowed me to work through my church, but then we started public school Bible clubs in our secondary school. And that was really my first mission field. And it was a cross-cultural experience because there's so many different ethnic groups and cultures in America. And so I was then given the opportunity to minister to a conference that was being held at Cedarville University for Chinese immigrants. There was a lot of Chinese churches. So that was my next big leap into a cross-cultural setting without even leaving the country. And I started thinking, Lord, I think you want me to serve you for the rest of my life, but I grew up as a farmer. What are you going to use a farmer to do? Well, just about that time, a missionary who was raising support to go to the Ivory Coast came to our church. And he shared what God was doing there and the lifestyle, the standard of living, the skills that would be necessary to live there. And I said, hey, a farmer can do that. That's how God can use a farmer. And so from there, I really just started praying, Lord, is this what you would have me do? And when you start seeking God's will, he makes it very clear. So I'm going to youth conferences and camps, and they're preaching on, could it be that God is calling you to be his servant? And I remember one of the messages was by a man named Tom Farrell. And here he is taking us through Paul's letter to Timothy. And he says, I count it an honor that God has entrusted this to me. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's what I want to do. And so I talked to my pastors, and they said, well, there are a couple really helpful things. First of all, from Psalm 37, verse 4, it says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Well, it's not just that he gives you what you want, it's that he places within you the desires that you should have, and then he brings them about. He causes them to become a reality. And then taking that along with 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, whoever desires to serve in the office of bishop or overseer.
He desires a good thing.
A good thing. And so they said the fact that you even desire this, and for the reasons that you desire it, would be an indication of God's calling. But then my pastor asked me a really soul-searching question that I challenge all of the students here with. He said, do you think you can be content or satisfied doing anything else with your life? Is there any other job you could do, any other thing that you could spend your life pursuing that would give you this kind of satisfaction? If there is, do that instead, because ministry is hard and you're going to quit.
Right.
If you can be satisfied doing anything else, God hasn't called you. But if this is more than just an interest, if this is a passion, if this is a burden that you just can't get off of your heart and mind, then it's likely that God is calling you.
It's like when Paul said, this one thing I do. He had a singular passion and he couldn't do anything else. Jeremiah the same. Because I tried to stop preaching, but it just burned inside of me, and it was like a volcano. I couldn't hold it back. So
Exactly.
Yeah, great advice.
And so I knew from that point, it's obvious, between what Scripture had already said and the doors that the Lord was opening, how he's speaking through these messages, through wise counselors. I mean, these are all things we need to consider. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And God just kept revealing this was, in fact, his will for my life. And so I was in secondary school, and I knew that many countries in Africa spoke French, so I took French in secondary school so that whether it was English or French, either way, I'd be able to minister and hopefully pick up the local languages as well. And so that's how it started.
So,
but how did you find yourself in Zambia?
and the other thing, he's very modest and humble, and says he keeps referring himself to a farmer. But I think you also need to share with us how God, God took you to university, you prepared, you've done seminary training, and so that's your background and so forth, and yet in a unique way you've been prepared for this ministry. So go ahead and answer Sandy's question.
Okay, so say what was your specific
Zambia
question
is not
again?
French speaking.
Exactly. How did I find myself here? Well, I started studying and preparing myself as much as I could during secondary school.
Yeah.
From the missions conferences, everything I could get my hands on to read, and practical experience. I would go to New York City and work with open-air evangelists, and as a result, I was exposed to the different universities that offered great training. And back when I was a student, the one that stood out as the most focused on missions and Christ-centered program for missions was Northland Baptist Bible College. So I went there and got an amazing training with missiology and its practical implications. And so, yes, I did. I earned a degree in global missions from there, and as well then continued on and got a master's degree in church planting and evangelism through Liberty University. But all of that was just the next step of God leading me here. I met a friend at Northland, whose father was a missionary here in Zambia. And everyone kept hearing my heart and passion was to go to the unreached places, go to the more rural settings, to live in the bush, and use the skills that I had from farming. And so my friend said, Jamie, when you do your internship, you need to consider going to visit my father, because that's exactly what he's doing. Most of his work is done in rural settings, and they have planted around 40 churches through a multiplication of 3 churches that then planted more healthy churches, and it kept spreading. And I said, that's perfect. That's what I want to do. So it was during my internship that I came to Zambia for the first time, and it was a very special time because...
With Mandy or alone?
Yes, I brought Mandy with me so that I could propose to her. We actually got engaged at Victoria Falls down in Livingston.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's a romantic as well, if you haven't picked that one up.
Yeah, I mean, Victoria.
Yep. And obviously the goal was to go not just to a spectacular place to propose, but for us to be able to see, is this where God would be leading us in the future? And it was. I mean, it was very obvious to both of us. So we went back. I was still a student and still needed to finish up another year of university. So we got married during that time, finished as married students. It was a wonderful decision. It fit us well. And from there, we intended to come right back here to Zambia and work in the rural settings, but God had some other plans. In fact, I was a pastor in America for about 8 years prior to coming here.
So you came, you landed fulfilling that dream and God's call in what year?
We arrived full-time here in Zambia in October of 2012.
And you initially were in the southern province, I think Choma? Is that right?
So during the rainy season, we were in the Choma area, but the majority of our time we spent in a very rural village called Nambaza, about 180 kilometers outside in Chief Shizongo's chiefdom, just outside of the Kafue National Park. And so it was truly a rural setting like we'd always dreamed of. Prides of lions, herd of elephant, they would just go through in the ministry settings that we would be at. The leopards in the trees at night.
So you ministered in that area for, I'm assuming, a few years anyway. And then talking about this leading of God, how then did you sense, because to move from such a rural dynamic into a city and into a training institution such as Sun Tropical Baptist University, that had to be a big transition. How did that happen, and how did God lead you to that point?
Yeah, it was a huge transition.
So we are now at journey from Southern Province took it way at Central Africa Baptist University.
Yes.
Yeah, we loved what we did. We weren't looking for any change, but the whole point of missions is to work yourself out of a job. You are a temporary tool in the hands of God, but the one thing that needs to be in the mind of every missionary is the centrality of the local church.
Yes.
So right from the very beginning, we didn't try to do anything ourselves. There were already churches, healthy churches, that needed to continue to grow and gain more maturity and more health, but they were already there in existence in Choma. And so just like the truth from John chapter 4, the Lord had already been at work, and we were just entering into the harvest where others had been planting and watering, and now the harvest was ready. So from the very beginning, it was a multifaceted ministry. We were training people who would then be able to teach others also. It was 2 Timothy 2:2. Mm-hmm. And they would go with us and minister for about 1 week of the time that we would be out in Nambaza. Then they would come back to their own ministries, and we would continue discipling. And from that, what was happening was the new believers out there had role models from within their culture that they could look up to and seek advice from. As a result, those two churches that were planted continued to grow, and both of them have planted another church, and now they're on 2 additional churches. It's amazing to see the multiplication factor when you do it God's way. And so as a result, what was really needed next was for me to get out of the way. You can't train people to do something and then occupy the position that they're trained to do and expect them to do it. So it was the question of what's next. And we actually came up to CABU. We've had a relationship with CABU for years. Both Phil and myself are with the same mission organization. So we knew of each other and had developed a friendship from the beginning. My first time visiting the campus was for leadership conference in 2012. I brought up the leaders from Choma area, and it was great. So as a result of that, I actually became an adjunct faculty member, developing classes and teaching classes for what would later become the Theological Studies by Extension program that we currently offer. So when we got to that point where it was necessary for us to now commend these believers to the Lord and step out, what next? We knew God had us here in Zambia, but how could we continue to multiply these efforts and see more leaders trained? And CABU wasn't on my radar. I actually thought of it for my father-in-law and mother-in-law because he loves to train. And so when they came to visit in 2014, we brought them up to expose them to this ministry here. And during that time, Phil was putting together a curriculum for a class that would be taken by all students, Introduction to Global Missions. He asked if I would help put that material together, and I did. Even though I wasn't going to be the one teaching it, I provided some resources. And he sent me an email on my way back down towards Choma. I get it, I think, when we're in Lusaka, and it says, "This is great stuff, and we really want to offer a missions program here at CABU. Would you be willing to consider coming?" And once again, the leading of the Lord. It reminds me of what we see in the book of Proverbs, that, in his mind, a man, he plans his course, but it's the Lord who directs his steps. Yeah. Proverbs 16:9. And that's what the Lord was doing. And what really resonated with me from here was that we had a vision at CABU to facilitate obedience to the Great Commission until every village, where I had already been and was passionate about, and every town and every city across the whole continent of Africa would be reached through the presence of a gospel-preaching church.
Healthy church.
I said, that's exactly what I've been wanting to see, and that's what we've started to see beginning there, but it's already further along through the churches that were being ministered to up here. And so being presented with that opportunity was God expanding my influence, giving me an opportunity that I did not expect and was greatly humbled by, but I saw the need and I saw the opportunity and the timing of the Lord. And so it didn't take long. We were here at the end of July to visit the campus. By January of 2015, we had moved up here and started leading the program for the missions training.
And so here we are in 2020, right? 5 years, almost 5 years down the road, or roughly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're actually, since we're halfway through, so it's 5.5 years in. Yeah.
And so you've done a wonderful job pulling together the missions minor, I guess we would call it, and pulling that together, and that's functioning. We've had, I think, 2 years of graduates out of that, right?
Actually 3, because one of them really worked hard to get all of the program going, even though he was already a student here. So 3 years worth of graduates and 16 total graduates between our degree, diploma, and certificate levels.
And now God is leading you again.
Yes, and once again, it was a thing that I was not looking for, not really expecting. Very thrilled with what God's doing here, and looking forward to the continued growth of what God's doing here. And yet, once again, the truth of Proverbs 16:9 comes out. In our minds, we plan up our course, but the Lord directs the steps. And so, yeah, there is a change coming. It is actually coming up pretty quickly as well. And so the upcoming semester that we're embarking on at the end of July will be my final semester in these roles that I have at CABU, because once again, God is expanding my opportunity to influence from where we started in a village, going to a city, to a country, to a continent, and now to the globe. And I've been asked to be the next general director for IBM Global, the mission agency that I have been working with since we've been here in Zambia back in 2012.
So maybe just speaking to that role a little bit, what would be the scope of your job?
Thinking of it from the standpoint of the missionaries that we already have on the field, we have 80 missionaries already. And so facilitating their ability to carry out the work of church planting movements around the globe starts with the ministering to their needs, to make sure that they are spiritually healthy and being cared for, as well as the logistics of facilitating getting the resources from their supporting churches to them on the field. And I think, once again, the focus needs to be on the centrality of the local church. A mission agency such as IBM Global is a para-church organization. It comes alongside of the church to serve the church. And what that looks like is you've got already existing churches that are carrying out the Great Commission and sending missionaries out. So that would be a aspect, part of the scope of the job, is to create and maintain healthy relationships with those sending churches and supporting churches. So going and speaking in their congregations for missions conferences, seminars, things of that nature. And it also would then be helping to see the churches that are springing up on the mission fields be active in missions as a part of their very DNA. And so a mission board director needs to go onto the fields of the missionaries where they are serving to know the opportunities and the challenges so that they can best minister to those missionaries, and also set a good example for the churches, for example, right here in Zambia, that are very passionate about engaging in the Great Commission and sending out missionaries not only to their own Jerusalem and Judea, but also the Samarias that they have of neighboring countries and reaching to the ends of the earth as well. So you've got those factors. going to universities that would be training the missionaries that are going out, and offering to them, if IBM Global is the right fit for you, we would love to help facilitate you getting to the field and ministering to your needs as well. And so you've got that kind of ministry, as well as often teaching block classes, doing what I do here, but in a 1-week setting in some of the universities there. So it involves a lot of things, a lot of speaking, a lot of administration, and a lot of ministering to the hearts and lives of missionaries.
We are obviously sad to see Jamie go. He has been a great help, I would say, in the missions department, a great fit in the CABU family. But at the same time, acknowledging God's leading and God's will, we are glad that the Lord is leading you, even to a greater platform, I would say. But I think the most important thing for us is God's leading.
Yeah,
God's will is the best.
Yeah, and we really are very excited because we've walked with you through this process over months and months, and just watched clearly the same direction and carefulness that you demonstrated in getting to Zambia, and then the same careful process of following God's leading to come to CABU has clearly been the same exact process that you've engaged to come to this conclusion of accepting this position that's been offered. So we are thrilled, and part of what CABU is about is preparing men and seeing God launch them out to serve Him around the globe. And so we're kind of excited to have one of our own CABU people leading a global mission organization.
Yeah.
So we look forward to continuing the opportunities of working together and having you in and training and some of these block classes and things that you were talking about. So we're we're sad because of our personally, but we are so excited about what God is doing. It's very, very evident.
I mean, I think the sadness is just, a friend, a co-worker, a co-laborer is going away. That's the sad, the sad part, but thrilled in that sense. Jamie, we are confident that the Lord has prepared you for success in this your new role. The experience you've had here in Zambia, in Southern Province, at CABU, and now to lead missions at a global stage. You have been prepared for this.
Yeah, amen.
And
we'll be praying for you.
Well, thanks. And those mixed emotions that you've mentioned are mutual. There's always a sadness with the ending of an era of a particular engagement in the ministry, and yet it's not the ending of a relationship at all. In fact, it's the expanding of that, and so I greatly look forward to continuing to serve CABU in this new platform as well. And truly, without my time here, I can say for sure that I would not be prepared for the next task that the Lord has laid before me. And God has used the ministry here and each person that I have ministered alongside of, as well as ministered to help mold me, shape me, and grow me for this next task.
Well, let's conclude our wrap this up. Yes, let's wrap this up. I know you're going to be back with us next week, and we're going to be talking missions and church planting. But let's close this segment with a word of prayer, and I'm just asking Pastor Sandala if you would just pray and commit Jamie and his family and God's blessing upon them as they continue to faithfully follow the Lord and serve Him in this new role.
Okay. Before I do that, you are also one of the pastors at Kito Church.
Yes, well, it's been, once again, the beauty of missions ministry. You're a practitioner, so there is church planting, but then there's also the training. I mean, that's exactly what you see from Paul, that he then handed down to Timothy, the things that you've heard from me, among many witnesses now, you entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. That's what we've been able to do together at Keepway Church. And as a result, actually, one of our ministries from Keepway Church was to plant another church in the neighboring city of Chingola. So since last September, really, I've been leading that ministry and trying to get that church plant to the point of being able to take its next steps and be able to become an organized New Testament local church.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. We'll be back next week with Pastor Jamie as we continue to pursue this theme, missions and God's will. Join us next week. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for how you have led our brother Jamie and the family. We thank you for how you have prepared him for this next task. And we commend him unto your care, that you will use him mightily. You will continue to protect his soul. You will continue to give him a divine passion for souls. We pray a prayer of protection upon the entire family, even as they process this transition. We thank you for the time we have enjoyed with Jamie and the family, and we have a few more months to enjoy and just love one another in Christ. So we thank you for everything. May your name be praised through everything for the sake of Christ. Amen.
Amen.